Hello, everyone. Today we'll start talking about Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, which is a more rigorous, careful philosophical treatise that he presented, perhaps the most influential work he wrote. Here's again a brief description of the major goals for Descartes' philosophical project. He wants to distinguish and defend legitimate Christian belief from widespread religious superstition. I mean, he's right in the aftermath of the Reformation, when the Catholic Church, as the foundation or the centralized authority for religious claims, has been undermined, and widespread religious disagreement abounds. And he's very bothered by that. He wants to use reason to try to settle some of that. He wants to find a kind of knowledge that is certain, that cannot be mistaken, that cannot be doubted, that is indubitable, and build upon that certain knowledge, the whole edifice of knowledge, the sciences on top of that. He wants to provide a first philosophy, which is a philosophy that grounds the credibility of empirical science itself, that justifies this empirical science as a credible way of attaining truth. And it is up to Descartes that we make an explicit distinction between two different ways of understanding inquiry and justification of beliefs and ways of coming to know reality. And one is rationalism, which is the claim that humans ultimately know what they know because of the reason. It is the capacity to reason that ultimately grounds knowledge. Reason is the ultimate court of appeal when it comes to knowing. And that's contrasted with empiricism. Empiricism emphasizes the senses instead of reason. It claims that humans ultimately know what they know because of the senses. The senses are the windows into reality. The senses are the ultimate court of appeal when it comes to knowledge. Knowledge claims are verified or vindicated or supported on the basis of experiments or sensation. It is sensation that grounds knowledge or access to reality. Descartes is a great proponent of rationalism. He provides us with some reasons for doubting empiricism, and this begins in Meditation 1. So let's start looking at that, looking at reasons for doubting that the senses are credible, that they're the right kinds of foundation for knowledge. And here's an argument that I've extracted very early on in Meditation 1, I've extracted from the readings. Here's the first claim or the first premise. It is foolish to trust entirely anything which has deceived us in the past. It's a claim about wisdom. Here's an observation about the senses. The senses have deceived us in the past. And here are a couple of examples that are not in the text, but I like to use them to illustrate the fact that senses have deceived us in the past. So suppose that one day you're sitting with a friend in the shade of a tree, right? You're sitting there in the shade, and you look down and you see the shadow, right? The shadow of the tree is there. And you look at it for a little while, you notice that it seems stationary. Your senses, your sight tell you that the shadow of the tree is not moving, right? Stationary, it's just there. And then you look to your friend, you keep on talking for 20 minutes or so, half an hour, and then you look down to look at the shadow again. And now you realize it has moved. It is not where it was when you looked half an hour, 20 minutes ago. It's no longer in the same spot. And then you realize, oh, my senses were deceptive. The shadow was moving when I saw it last time. It was just moving very slowly that they were not able to detect it. So I was foolish to go from my senses tell me that the shadow is not moving, is stationary, to believing them, to forming the belief the shadow of the tree is stationary and not moving. The transition from this is what appears to on the basis of the senses to believing that's how things are, that transition was a foolish one. I was deceived in this manner. That's one example. Here's another example. Suppose you get a glass of water, and then you put your finger through the glass of water. And you notice if you look at it, you realize that the finger bends depending on how you move the glass. The finger seems to bend. Your sight tells you fingers upon entering water, they bend. And so if you just trust your sight, you think, oh, you believe. Reality is such that water bends fingers. But of course, we know that that's not the case. We use reason to correct the perception of the senses. We reason about how light works, how light reflects, how light bounces back off of objects, how light distorts the way in which light is reflected off of objects. and how that distortion manifests itself in a visual illusion. In other words, it's not the case the fingers bend as they enter the water. It just seems the way because of the way in which the light is reflected through the water. But notice that that's reason correcting what the senses give you. It is using your reason to correct the faulty impression that the senses give you. So both of those, and now that I've pointed this out, you can think of all sorts of ways in which the senses are deceptive, right? They deceive in all sorts of ways, or at least they fall short, they're mistaken, they're ill-equipped to be accurate measures onto reality in many different ways. So far, that's a relatively innocent observation. Sometimes, that's claim number 2, sometimes the senses tell you something or present reality in a particular way, depict reality in a particular way, and it is false. They depict reality, represent reality in a faulty way. So that's a relatively minor observation. Here's what follows from the observation about sometimes the senses being deceptive. With the principle of wisdom articulated in premise 1, it follows that, therefore, it is foolish to trust the senses entirely. In other words, if you're intelligent, if you pay attention to the way the senses work, you will have this level of caution whenever you see something, whenever you hear something. You would always have in the back of your mind, well, the senses can be deceptive. They are sometimes deceptive. They're fallible. They make mistakes. So perhaps this time is one of those times, right? You will always have this caution in the back of your mind. So far, nothing impressive has happened in the argument. Nothing grand has happened in the argument. So far, conclusion number 3, just is a little caution, like don't trust your senses foolishly, like thoroughly, completely, entirely. Sometimes they deceive you. Just be aware of that, right? So 3 is a pretty kind of innocuous, kind of relatively insignificant claim. But let's put it together with Descartes' methodological doubt. Let's throw methodological doubt as a 4th premise. And the method says that the methodological doubt says, withhold dissent from any belief which is subject to the slightest doubt. It's a method for going about attaining truth, or certainty, the kind of knowledge that cannot be doubted, the kind of knowledge upon which the edifice of knowledge can be built. And now when you put 3 and 4 together, something very radical happens, something very interesting happens, something very worthy of notice happens. It follows from 3 and 4 that it is wise or best to withhold dissent or suspend judgment on the dictates of the senses. When one tries to attain certain knowledge, a knowledge that cannot be doubted, the right kind of stuff upon which to build beliefs in science, the senses are not the right starting point, because they're fallible, they make mistakes. So do not believe the object of the senses if what you're after is knowledge, the kind of knowledge that cannot be doubted. So now this is a much more radical conclusion. It says empiricism is not the right basis for the knowledge that Descartes is after, the one that cannot allow for error. So one cannot begin with the senses. The senses do not afford certain knowledge, a knowledge that cannot be doubted. So empiricism has to be discarded. Here is a different argument that is slightly stronger in its conclusion, but it's also aimed at undermining a lot of beliefs that we hold, or at least undermining the certitude sometimes we place on those beliefs, undermining the thought that those beliefs are really the foundation of knowledge. And here's the different argument. Here's the first premise. There are no certain indications or marks by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep. That is the state of being awake from the state of being asleep. Notice that this does not say that there is no marks from which we can distinguish the state of being asleep from the state of being awake. There are marks by which we can distinguish being asleep from being awake. Namely, many dreams are very weird, like fantastic thing happens. You can fly in the dream, like weird things, right? Like things that don't happen in the real world. They do happen in sleep. And many times you realize that. When I was younger, I was able to, I had a lot of very vivid dreams. And for a period of time, I was very aware of that. I was, during the dream, I realized, oh, hey, this is a dream. And it was very weird that I can continue on with a dream while knowing that it was a dream. So it gave me this kind of freedom to know that if I found nothing, I wasn't going to die, things like that. It was strange. One particular night during my sleep, I had a dream that I didn't like. It was kind of not quite a nightmare, but I didn't like it. And it occurred to me in my dream, oh, it will be great if this is a dream. If this is a dream, none of this is really happening. So like life is better, life is good. But then I thought, how do I know that I'm asleep or awake? And then I remember the good old, tip, pinch yourself. And if it hurts, then you're awake. And if it does not hurt, you're asleep. And then I pinched myself, but it hurt. So my first thought in my dream was, oh no, I'm awake. This is happening. No, no, this is too bad. But then it occurred to me in my dream, wait a minute, I could have just dreamt that it hurt, right? The mark is if you pinch yourself and it does not hurt, that's not real, because in the real life it hurts when you get pinched. So that's a mark of being asleep. So there is a mark. There's a way of an indication for knowing that you're asleep. Pinch yourself, and if it does not hurt, it means you're asleep. But if it does hurt, it does not mean you're awake, because you can just dream that you've been pinched and it hurts, and that's exactly what happened to me. So that time I realized, oh, there's just nothing I can experience here, and that I can know with certainty that I am awake. For everything that I do experience when I'm awake, I can also dream if the dream is vivid enough. There's just no way for me to tell the difference if the dream is vivid enough. Now, I can tell that I'm asleep when some things that I don't have in the real world happen, but that's not the point. The point is that anything that I can experience while I'm awake, and I can also dream. So I can have a dream that feels so real, so vivid, and only has things that are, that can be experienced. And when that happens, there's no way to tell whether you're asleep or not, or whether you're awake. So here's what follows, though. If there are no indications by which I can clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep, then at no moment can I be certain that I'm not sleeping. Any experience you have at any moment, you can just wake up the moment after that and realize, oh, I was asleep. So at any experience, at any moment, regardless of what you're doing, any stateness of being aware or consciousness of being aware could just itself be a dream. You can never be sure that you're not dreaming. And that's kind of an insightful thing to say. But if you put it together with methodological doubt, withhold dissent from any belief which is subject to the slightest doubt, now you get something very radical again. Therefore, I must withhold dissent with regards to all beliefs connected with being awake. If what I'm trying to do is attain certain knowledge, a knowledge that cannot be doubted, a knowledge that I cannot be mistaken about, any belief connected with the fact of being conscious, with the fact of being awake, any belief that presupposes being awake, is not a good ground for that. So for example, I have this experience of speaking in front of a computer. I have this experience of recording a lecture. And it seems to me that it is true. It seems to me that I'm not laying down in bed sleeping. It seems to me that I'm recording a lecture. Like I have this very vivid experience that I associate with being awake, and I'm actually in front of the computer. What this argument points to is that I could be dreaming that very thing. It is possible for me to be dreaming that exact experience and not, in fact, be talking to a computer, but be laying in bed. And because that's possible, I have some doubt that I'm actually experiencing this and that I'm awake. So if what I'm trying to do is attain certain knowledge, I cannot begin with any belief that is connected, that depends upon my being awake. So all of my beliefs that I have that presuppose that I'm awake instead of asleep are not the foundation of knowledge, certain knowledge. So it's a very grand skeptical claim that most of the things that I believe, at the end of the day, I cannot truly know, when truly knowing means I cannot be mistaken about those things. So that is, the beliefs connected to or which depend upon being awake are not the proper grounds for knowledge, a kind of knowledge that I cannot be mistaken about, and upon the kind of knowledge upon which the edifice of beliefs, the edifice of knowledge, can be built. So let's stop here. We'll continue talking about meditation 1 next time. See ya.